Welcome back for another cup of liberty. This is one of my videos on authoritarianism, and in the last video we talked about normative threat and that how people with an authoritarian psychological disposition, meaning they tend to feel threatened when the norms of the group with which they identify diverge too far from their own, such that they cease to be able comfortably to find their own individual identity in their group identity. We were talking about how those people manifest that psychological disposition as support for political authoritarianism, which is the tendency to institutionally coerce people to adhere to certain norms, okay? And how that happens under conditions of normative threat. So let's think about Trump's election in those terms. The most famous word in the entire presidential election campaign was probably deplorables, right? What Clinton called her opponents, or the people who supported her opponent, Donald Trump, deplorable. That's a horrendous word. Now, in saying that, but more important, in believing it, she crystallizes the conditions of normative threat that many people in the center and to the right of the political spectrum have been feeling. What kind of people would be concerned when they hear a presidential candidate say that? Well, obviously it's the people who think she's talking about them. And the reason that it matters is because when you start using words like that to speak about your opponents, and I mean not your actual opponent like Donald Trump, but all of the hundreds of millions of people who support him, right? Then you are really making sure people feel threatened. It's crazy, right, for a politician to do it. Because what you're doing is saying, I may become your leader. Not only do I take no account of your political views, being deplorable, you are separate from me, right? So she's splitting America up into an us and a them, explicitly doing that. The deplorables and the non-deplorables, right? But she's saying, once I've split you, us and them, I'm putting my people above you. Because obviously deplorable, that's moral condescension, isn't it? It's setting somebody up morally above another group. This group above this group. So what she's really saying is, not only do I not care what you think is so bad, that you are so awful, that I am absolutely happy to run the country without paying any attention to what you believe. It's deplorable. It's beneath me. It doesn't even deserve engagement. So this is not she's making it not a political argument anymore, right? She's threatening to ignore them. She's actually almost making explicit the conditions of normative threat, right? Because remember, what authoritarianism is, when it manifests, it's a reaction against a feeling of alienation. And she's saying, yes, I'm going to alienate you. That's what she's saying. That's what Clinton was saying. So a lot of people who just don't feel, let's say they weren't sold on Clinton and what she represents, she's scaring them. She's condescending to them. Wow, rather stupid thing to do for a politician. And as we're going to find out in a later video, George Orwell would have hated it, right? So what kinds of people were feeling piled onto when Clinton called them deplorables? Well, these are people who don't feel quite comfortable or have been feeling increasingly uncomfortable, let's put it that way, in a culture that has been telling them that they're racist because they think we have an immigration problem and maybe want to control who comes in, maybe at least wants to know who's coming in to our country. They're being told they're racist because of that, even though they don't feel themselves to be racist. Maybe they've been told they're sexist because, God forbid, they think men and women are biologically different. Or worse, maybe they don't believe in the pay gap, the wage gap. Maybe they believe that men and women on average earn different amounts because men and women on average in the aggregate make different choices, have different priorities in their life. Not because companies are choosing to pay men more when they could just save a lot of money and make their profits greater by paying women less to do the same job. Why would they be doing that? So folks getting called sexist, and they don't experience themselves as sexist. They just have a different opinion from maybe a lot of the media pundits or a lot of the academics who are, have these platforms in our mainstream culture. Perhaps even they were being called transphobe when they felt, or if they voiced the opinion that, a guy who's struggling with a gender transition from male to female, but still has a deep voice and maybe looks a bit like a man in a dress to them, maybe they feel that that isn't the same thing as a woman. Maybe just they got called transphobe because they don't quite get it. They just don't see it that way. I'm not taking a position on it. I'm just saying, if you've been condescended to, told you're bad, or maybe told you're stupid because you haven't got with the cultural program or the moral program of a particular political group, then you feel like then the normative threat for you is rising. And a lot of people who just have more conservative views are being called fascist. Okay. There's a lot of people who've been called fascist who know they're not fascists. So obviously people who don't identify with the left have been increasingly alienated by some of the louder elements on the left, and it pushed them into an authoritarian reaction, meaning support for somebody who is prepared to use institutionalized coercion, which I am against, just to be clear, to rein in some of those who they feel are responsible for moving the norms of their culture, of America, too far away from their norms. Okay, that's how some of the folks who voted for Trump were driven to support a guy like Trump, who was saying, let's just, close down newspapers who write things that we don't like, who was saying, let's execute Edward Snowden because he's a traitor, who has, in other words, appeared to be very illiberal, right? Who has clearly got some quite authoritarian tendencies. Okay. That's how we got Trump. In the next video, we're going to talk a little bit about the reaction to getting Trump. Thanks for being with me.